everybody, welcome back to another video. My name is Adrienne Lee. I also go by the Wandering Art Historian. I'm so glad you decided to join us for more discussions on art. This web series we're going to kick off is how to read a painting. Are you totally excited? I'm excited. This is a great series to kick things off with because it really shows that art is for everyone. If you are new to art history, this is a really good web series to start out with because I'll help you, warm up those art history muscles, get you looking at art in a very analytical way, and also give you some confidence when you're looking and researching art. If you are a regular museum goer, this is definitely going to benefit you as well because I'm going to give you so much information that you're going to go into a museum and be able to read all these paintings on your own. It's going to be awesome. Now, for the sake of this web series, it's not an all-inclusive, every little piece of art history like you might take at a college course that goes for weeks and weeks and weeks. We are emphasizing just painting. I have thrown in a couple of illuminated manuscripts and mosaics and sculptures throughout. However, we are really going to focus on paintings. And because of that, it's going to really focus on Western art. I have included some examples of art from all different cultures around the globe. But for the most part, it's definitely an emphasis on Western art. Just a heads up. Now, I'm a fan of Indiana Jones, and I know what you're saying. You're thinking right now, Adrienne, Indiana Jones is an archaeologist, not an art historian. True. But I still feel kind of a kinship because whenever I look at a new piece of art or discover a new artist, it's kind of like going on an adventure, isn't it? It's kind of like being presented with another mystery to be solved, and every mystery can be solved by looking at the clues, right? So what are the clues when you're looking at art? Colors, symbols, and stories. How are colors used throughout art history? How are symbols used? And what are the repeated stories that show up time and time again throughout art history? This web series is going to cover all of that. Now, because like I said, I'm not going to throw you in the deep end. The first few videos are going to be an introduction to kind of warm you up. After that, it'll be a bit more intensive, but we're going to have the best time, so don't even worry about it. We're going to talk about the origins of reading a painting and where that term comes from. We're going to talk about colors, symbols, and stories in your everyday life and how you're already reading those things every day. And then we're going to practice reading colors, symbols, and stories in art together. How does that sound? Sound good? Okay. Good. So let's talk about this idea of reading a painting. Where does that term come from? And here I have on the screen some illuminated manuscripts to act as a clue, because really we get this term dating back to the Middle Ages. Now, it was called the Dark Ages for a reason, because during this time period, as I mentioned, in the West, predominantly in Europe, a lot of academia, a lot of culture was lost during this time. Think about it. Famine, plague, death, war, just a whole bunch of not great things happening at the same time. So because of that, we lose a lot of our culture during this time period, which results in a lot of people, the majority of the population in general, becoming illiterate, okay? So we're not able to read or write pretty much at this time. Pretty much anybody, regardless of your class. Maybe if you were more religious, like a cleric or a priest or what have you, you would have that training, but not just your everyday serfs, basically, okay? And what's interesting is you have to think, well, where's everybody, regardless of place in society, where's that one place everybody goes at least once a week to hang out and learn and maybe get a little bit of hope, and that would be church, right? Everybody was going to church, and this acts as a place where it's a bit of an education. How do you relay these religious stories to a group of people who can't read or write? Now, sure, you can tell people, right? Audio, but another way is to do it visually. So, for example, if you were in a church and you saw an image like this, you would read the colors, symbols, and hopefully know that it's a religious story so that you can piece all the clues together to figure out what this painting is about. So let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot. I've got my handy dandy pointer here, which is actually a paintbrush. Seems appropriate. So let's look at this together. All right, so we have this painting here, and we have a central figure, and he's kind of in this niche. Do you notice how it's painted to look like stone? Pretty good, artist. And because it's just one individual in this niche, it definitely tells us that we need to focus on this person. And it kind of implies that they're special, right? Another implication that they're special is that they have this golden circle around their head that we know is a halo. Also around this little creature. Interesting. Do you notice that this gentleman has some long, scraggly hair and a beard, and he's kind of wearing this tunic here, this little dress type thing, and you notice how the sleeve kind of looks kind of raggedy, and it looks kind of brown and hairy. Interesting. But he's covered over in a very beautiful, bright red robe that's also lined in gold, and that kind of implies, he's probably pretty special, despite the fact that his tunic underneath isn't doing so great, right? He's also holding a book on which sits the most sweet, precious little lamb you ever saw with a halo around its head, and he is also pointing specifically at this lamb. So if you think that we're in a church and you see an image like this, I'm going to give you a second. Who do you think this painting depicts? If you said John the Baptist, you would be correct. Because the clues are his long hair, his scraggly beard. He's wearing a tunic. Remember, if you remember ever going to Sunday school or vacation Bible school, he wore the camel's hair because he wandered the desert, right? And he came as a precursor to Jesus, as a way of being a prophet, foretelling the coming of the Messiah, who is referred to as the Lamb of God, which is why he is pointing directly to a lamb. See how easy that is? You just read that painting. Just that. How awesome. Well done. Now, during the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, if you will, there are a lot of religious paintings and pieces of artwork, obviously, because we're all congregating at church, okay? We do see an abundance of mythological paintings coming during the time period after the Middle Ages, which is known as the Renaissance. Right. Renaissance actually translates to a rebirth, and that rebirth is a rebirth of the human spirit, the human culture, the human society, basically a return to academia. And it makes sense if you think about it, because when you're rebuilding society after centuries of plague and famine and war, you're going to want a good model. You're going to look at your world and your society and say, we're not going to look at the Middle Ages. We're going to skip over that time period, and we're going to look at ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And we're going to use those ideas from ancient Greece and ancient Rome to rebuild our society, a return to academia, a return to art and culture. And that's where you also see this explosion of mythological paintings. Because as we know, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, They love those gods and goddesses, don't they? Right? Okay. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it that way, right? That is how we get the idea of reading a painting. You're reading it with your eyeballs, looking for all the clues. That's it. How easy is that? Art history, not that hard, actually. It's pretty fun. Okay, so this idea of color being one of the clues that you look for when you are reading a painting is it's kind of a big deal. Okay, so whenever you hear people say that an art historian debated another art historian, or an artist debated this key concept or idea, let me just tell you, that's a nice way of saying that they argued. Okay, art historians, artists, we love to fight and argue, and we all think we're right. Okay, just a heads up. To show you how important this idea of color is to reading painting, I want to tell you about one of these famous arguments, okay? And we're going to do it by talking about this particular artist. These are two examples of the work of this incredible lady painter named Angelica Kauffmann. She lived 1741 to 1807. She was born in Switzerland, but she traveled all through Europe. And she became one of only 2 female founding members of the Royal Academy of Arts in London in 1768. That's pretty awesome, if you ask me. In 1778, she was commissioned by the Royal Academy to paint a set of 4 pieces titled The Elements of Art for their lecture hall. Okay, so that's a pretty awesome commission. 4 paintings depicting the elements of art. What are the elements of art, at least for this commission here? Invention, composition, design, and color. Oh, there's color, like I said, very, very important. So what Angelica Kauffmann decided to do was to paint an allegory of each of these ideas. And when they say design, they actually mean like illustration or drawing. So that kind of makes sense though, right? Now, traditionally, these allegories would have been men. An allegory is when you personify an idea like innocence or purity. How do you turn that concept into a painting? You turn it into a person, basically. So what Angelica Kauffmann did was she actually painted her 4 allegories as women, and it is believed that she used herself for each of the paintings as a model. So there are 4 self-portraits of Angelica Kauffmann as these 4 concepts of art, and I think that is pretty incredible. That's awesome, okay? So now we're looking at 2 of those paintings, and as I'm sure you can guess, the titles are design and color. And let's compare and contrast the 2 because it kind of gives us an idea of how artists interpreted the power of these 2 concepts when it came to art, okay? So first, let's look at this one, okay? Now this one is Angelica Kauffmann's interpretation of color, and I think it's pretty magical, okay? Let's read it together, shall we? Okay, so first of all, we see this beautiful woman elegantly dressed in a very beautiful golden robe where she has a red cloak just off to the side. However, we do see a little thing happening here with the top. In art history, refer to that as a nip slip. It is called a wardrobe malfunction. Her breast is out and exposed for all of us to see, but she doesn't seem to mind. Do you notice also her hair's kind of unkempt and it's just cascading down her shoulders, and she's in this incredibly beautiful utopian landscape. Tell you what, definitely a shout out to the Italian Renaissance here, definitely for sure. And she's kind of reclining back in the midst of this landscape. And do you notice something very interesting about her paint palette? Let's take a closer look. Do you notice that she is holding her paint palette here with her brushes Are there any little paint splotches on this paint palette? No, there aren't, okay? So that makes you question, where is she getting her paint? And look at this beautiful rainbow that crosses through this painting. So you have to ask yourself, did she go through all of her paints because she painted the rainbow? Or, which is more likely, is she getting her colors directly from the rainbow to put on her paint palette? That's pretty awesome, I think. Good job, Angelica Kauffmann, basically saying how important color is if you want to convey the beauty of nature. And just to drive this point home, I want you to notice a symbol that she's tucked away in this painting. Do you see this little creature down here? He's a little bit hard to see, but if you're like, what's that lizard doing there? It is a chameleon, which we know does what? It changes its color to suit its environment. Pretty awesome, I know. All right, so let's look at the next painting. This is Angelica Kauffmann's interpretation of design or illustration or drawing, okay? Now what's interesting is that we have our incredible artist here, another lady artist. She's totally covered up, for sure. She's in muted tones. Do you notice this entire painting is more muted in color? Her hair's tied back. She looks very much hard at work, doesn't she? It's like she's honing her craft or developing her skill, right? Do you notice that we're also kind of more indoors? We see a hint of nature in the background, but we also have these really amazing classical columns from antiquity, implying an architectural environment. And look at how intently she studies this marble sculpture of a human torso. Now at this time, it was still inappropriate for women artists to study live from a nude model. So this is what a woman artist would do, is they would study the marble sculptures of antiquity to get the anatomy correct. And boy, she's hard at work at it. She's already gone through a couple of pages, and it's a very interesting contrast when you look at the two together, right? Because with color, it's definitely an emphasis on being out in nature, a little bit of freedom and a little bit of being wild, while design emphasizes maybe more architectural, a little bit more structure, a little bit more rigid. And I think these are such a beautiful juxtaposition of what it takes to be an artist. And I think that's what Angelica was really trying to get across to us. Now, remember that whole arguing thing I mentioned before? Yeah. These are two of the concepts that artists were arguing about. Which was more important, color or drawing? And I gotta say, if you're gonna argue over something, that seems like the last thing you should argue over, because don't you need both? Yes, you do. This debate was raging in 18th century France, and you had the one group, the Poussinists, and they took their name from the artist Nicolas Poussin, and they said drawing was the most important skill because it required intellect, and it was a skill earned through intense study, while observing color relies merely on the eye. That sounds kind of rude, doesn't it? The people they were arguing with were the Rubenists, who looked up to the work of Peter Paul Rubens, who we'll see quite a few of his paintings over the next few weeks. And they believed that the greatest goal of painting was to emulate nature, and the best way to do that was through the use of color. They also believed that color appealed to the human senses and emotions. And that's a really interesting concept because, believe it or not, that bleeds into the early 1900s, this idea that color is how artists use, or what artists use to express feeling and emotion. So let's take that thread into modern art, think early 1900s, because here we have two examples of works of modern art. Here we have on this side on the left a piece of art by Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. He's a German artist who lived 1880 to 1938, and he was an artist who belonged to this group called the Bridge, German Expressionism, and they believed color above all. Color above all. Doesn't have to be realistic, doesn't have to be perfectly technically accurate. The most important thing was conveying emotion, and the way they did that was through color. The same thing with the painting on the right. Do you know who painted that? A guy named Henri Matisse. He was the remotely unofficial leader of what we call the Fauvists. That's a French group, which translates to wild beasts. And they were called that because of the bright colors that they used to convey feelings and emotions. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, bright colors means happy feelings, joyful, excited. But I have to ask you, when you look at these two paintings, they use bright colors, but I gotta say, these don't feel like the most happy, joyful paintings, do they? I don't think so. There's a lot of feelings and there's a lot of emotions going on, but they don't feel very positive. So that's one of the cool things that we have to study when it comes to reading color in paintings, because bright colors don't necessarily mean happy, joyful feelings and emotions, right? Okay, so let's do a little experiment to see how you are already reading colors in your everyday life, okay? I know you don't believe me, but by the time we're done with this, you will, because colors are everywhere, aren't they? Colors tell us what to do, right? You pull up to the stoplight. If it's green, you go. If it's red, you stop. And if it's yellow, please tell me you slow down. Slow down. Do not speed up to make the light, okay? Colors tell us what to do. Colors tell us who to root for. So if you see the garnet and gold guys, that means you're rooting for FSU, right? Colors tell us how to feel, right? Because we've got this guy on the side here in yellow, and that's your classic happy face, right? Okay, smiling happy face, it's yellow. However, we've got this gentleman here on the right, and he's not looking so good. That green kind of implies he's maybe feeling kind of sick. He also kind of looks like he's gonna, not great. So colors are already part of our daily lives, right? Now, I also teach a class called Art History and Pop Culture. Some of you may have taken this at the Winter Garden Art Association or at Rollins or elsewhere. And this whole class is dedicated to the idea that pop culture, even in the 21st century, pulls from art history for inspiration, okay? And one of the ways that pop culture does that is through film. Yes, through film. I know we've got a lot of time on our hands and we're blasting through Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime and everything, and we're consuming all these cool new movies and shows. Let me show you how directors and cinematographers are using film and color. How about that? Have we all seen this movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I mean, I really hope so. It's awesome. It's the Coen brothers, the incredible cinematographer Richard Deacon, if I understand correctly, if I remember correctly. Yes, Roger Deakins. So shout out to him, the best cinematographer alive. Yeah, let's do it. An incredible film that is set when? Does anybody remember? During the Great Depression, right? So how do you make a modern film look like it's taking place during the Great Depression? Here is an example. Do you notice in this top image how green the scene is? That doesn't really jive with what we think of with the Great Depression, right? Because think about it, the Dust Bowl We think of sepia-toned photographs and images, not just black and white, but kind of like a brown gold color. And look at what they've done, the colorist has done here in this particular image, how they've muted those colors, brought out the browns, the earthy colors, because that's more accurate to the time period. It tells us, the viewer, hey, this movie, this story takes place during the Great Depression, right? And if you think about it, when you go back and watch this movie again, you're going to notice everything almost looks like a sepia tone photograph from that time period. Do you notice that the browns and the golds and the kind of earthy colors jump out at you? Yeah. Did you ever notice that before? Maybe, maybe not, but you're definitely going to notice stuff like that now. What's another example? The Matrix. You have to watch this movie. I've talked to so many people who have never seen this movie before, and it kind of breaks my heart. This movie is 20 years old, and it's huge influence on pop culture, okay? But what's so cool about The Matrix is that the events of this story take place in two parallel worlds, if you think about it, right? You have reality, but then you have inside the Matrix, which is, as we find out, a computer simulation. How do you keep that separate? How do you help the viewer keep track of where the characters are? And you do that through color. The Wachowskis brilliantly separate the two. Do you notice that when they are in the real world where things are terrible, right? Very gray, blue, kind of a slate color, right? But when they are inside the Matrix, which is very interesting, it's a computer simulation. Do you notice they've taken that kind of green from those old computer monitors and they've emphasized the green? Watch this movie again for sure. It'll blow your mind, okay? So in this case, the Wachowskis helped us keep track of the two different locations of the story of this film, right? Awesome. Now, another director who does a lot with color is M. Night Shyamalan, right? We love his work, don't we? Well, maybe not everything. The thing about color and art is you can't say that red always means this or blue always means that. It kind of changes over time and from culture to culture, and a society looks at colors in different ways. What M. Night Shyamalan does, though, is a color doesn't necessarily mean anything in particular. He's using it to draw our eye to something in the scene. Okay, so for example, when you watch this movie over again, you're going to notice how bland and subdued all of the color is throughout this entire film. And because of that, whenever the color red is used, it jumps out at you even more. It is even more profound. And that is because M. Night Shyamalan is using the color red to draw your eye to different parts of the scene or to emphasize different characters. How awesome is that? This is just like 7 examples. There are tons of examples of this throughout The Sixth Sense. Watch it again and you'll see that I'm right. With this particular film, The Sixth Sense, M. Night Shyamalan is using the color red to really get us to look at different things in the scene or to highlight different characters. It's pretty awesome. Now, just to show you how good you are at reading color, especially when it comes to film, I want to draw your attention to the work of this particular designer artist. This gentleman goes by the name Hyos, Hyos, and what he does is he takes films and he reduces them to their primary colors, or the most prominent colors that show up repeatedly in the films, okay? Now, I know you're looking at this and you're like, what the heck films are these? Here's the thing, I will give you a clue. Both of these images depict a Disney animated feature. 1 and 2. Can you tell which one is which? Or what the films are? This one, if you said Cinderella, you are correct. What about this one here on the right? Toy Story. Well done, well done. Let's look at another set of colors here. Check out all these very icy, cold colors, right? And then next to that we have very warm colors, very hot. So what two films do you think are represented here? Frozen, The Lion King. See how easy it is? You're already reading art. You've been doing it your whole life and you don't even know it. So in our next video, we're going to dive into some more examples of how you're reading symbols in your everyday life. If you like this video, maybe toss a couple of coins in my virtual tip jar. Right now I'm using Venmo, but we will be adding additional payment options in the future, so stay tuned. And otherwise, please share these videos with your friends, family, anybody you think might be interested, because we're just getting started and we are going to have a great time. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'll see you next time.